Today I'm going to share with you 5 useful rules of thumb as you think about your retirement planning. And I'm also going to share 5 completely worthless rules of thumb I wish I could erase from human memory. That might be a little strong, but let's go for a walk and I'll let you decide. And be sure to stay until the end, because I'm gonna leave the most harmful rule of thumb that I think will move the needle the most for all of us until the very end. I'm going to start with the negatives, because I think the rules of thumb that are harmful are the ones, if you can avoid, are really going to help you. And the first rule of thumb I want to talk about is there's this general sense that, most people's portfolios are stocks and bonds, or tools that expose you to stocks and bonds, like low-cost exchange-traded funds and mutual funds. And there's this sense that, bonds can be low risk, but they can also be super high risk. As we just saw last year, 2022, bonds can move down, and they can move down quite a bit. It was quite a painful experience for people that thought, well, half of my portfolio is in stocks, and I know that's going to go up and down, but the other half's in bonds, so I'm okay. And unfortunately, some of those people found out, some bonds can be stable and secure, but some can be pretty risky. In fact, that was the event that started the whole Silicon Valley Bank meltdown, was their bond portfolio, which was like, on average, like U.S. treasuries that matured in 5 years. And obviously, the government's not going to default, right? They'll just print more cash. But the longer maturity, the longer until you get paid back on the bond, the more risk it has if interest rates go up and down. So just because you have bonds in your portfolio doesn't mean they're providing stability. You can take what's called creditor risk, which is the company that issued the bond. But you can also take, if you locked yourself into a 30-year bond at low interest rates, well, who wants that? They'd much rather have a bond that's maturing in a year and they can get the higher interest rates in a year. So the first one that I wish I could erase from human memory is that bonds are secure and safe. What it should say is some bonds are secure and safe. So be careful what you buy. So that's the first one. The next one, and I think this one's insane. The next rule of thumb is your asset allocation, your stock allocation should be, you take 100 and you subtract your age from it. So, when you're 30 years old, you take 100, you subtract 30. So, that rule of thumb says you should have 70% exposed to the bond market. And when you're 70 years old, you take 100, you subtract 70 from it, and it says you should have 30% of your portfolio in the stock market. And nothing could be further from the truth. Your asset allocation is a key way that you meet your goals and you keep your risk in check with the portfolio. It's probably 80% of the determinant of how much volatility you're going to have in the portfolio and what your long-term returns are going to be. So that rule of thumb, I think does a heck of a lot more harm than good. The way you should look at your asset allocation is, what are your goals? What are you trying to achieve? And then who are you? How painful is volatility for you? I mean, for most of us, a 30% gain in the stock market, that feels good, but it pales in comparison to how painful a 30% drop feels, right? So the pain of loss is much greater than the joy of gain. And so we have to take into account who we are. Some 30-year-olds, maybe a 70-30 portfolio makes sense. But for another 30-year-old, maybe they should be 100% in stocks. And for another 30-year-old, maybe they should be less than 70%. So it really comes down to who you are and what you're trying to achieve, and how painful volatility can be from you. I think another rule of thumb, it's not a bad place to start, but I think to keep this over your lifetime can hurt you, which is to save 10% of your income. I think when you're first starting off and you're not making much money, that's fine. When you're raising kids and you have a lot of expenses and a lot of responsibilities, I'd like to see that number, to the extent you can. I know it's not easy, but that number to be closer to 15 to 20% if you can do it. And certainly, if you can get your house paid off by the time you're 50, and all these things are hard to do, but at that point, maybe start thinking about saving more. So it's a good place to start, but you shouldn't feel like, well, if I'm saving 10%, I'm going to have a comfortable retirement, because you may or you may not. And when it comes to your retirement, you want to have clarity as to, what are the decisions I'm making and what are the impacts on that? The next painful mistaken rule of thumb that I think is super important to know is wrong. Well, the stock market's average 10% a year. So if the stock market's average 10% a year, I can take out in retirement about what the stock market averages, or if you're 50-50 stocks and bonds, about what half of the returns from bonds, half the return of stocks are, and I can just take that average out. That's a good way to run out of money, frankly. And there's super smart people that have made this mistake, including a very famous investor. Wasn't Warren Buffett, but it was a household name that we would all know. Actually wrote an article in a industry magazine that also a lot of people in the public read, where this person said, yeah, just take the average out and you'll be fine. And it turns out, no, you won't be. There's all kinds of statistical models that show that. But ideally, what you want to do is something called a Monte Carlo simulation. Most of us don't have tools to do this. You might be able to find a free tool online or an inexpensive tool. But, this is where wisdom comes into play. And it doesn't have to be expensive to have a financial advisor run something like that for you. So you do know what kind of withdrawal rate you can have in your portfolio. This isn't financial advice. I don't know your situation. As always, I do encourage you to work with a fee-only financial advisor on that. So don't just take out the average and say, well, I'm going to be okay taking out the average. I don't think you will be. Or if you are, you will be lucky. Another rule of thumb that I've heard is your life insurance needs should be 10 times what your annual gross salary is. So if you're making $100,000 a year, this rule of thumb would say, have $1 million worth of life insurance. And where I think that rule of thumb really hurts families is, what if you have a spouse that isn't working outside of the home? They're taking care of the kids or making sure that your family is thriving. What do you do then, right? How do you take that into account? Because 10 times zero. But yet, if that spouse were to pass away, the other spouse probably needs to hold down the fort and keep things together as much as they can, and probably continue working to provide for the family. But so they're going to have to hire a nanny or something. So the way you figure out life insurance is, have your kids finished college yet? What are the things that are important to you that if you were to pass away, you wouldn't be able to provide for your family? And that's really the purpose of life insurance. Okay, so good rules of thumb, and we can go through these a little more quickly than the others, but 5 good rules of thumb. You've heard me talk about the 4% rule, which talks about withdrawal rates. It gets you in the ballpark. I do think you still want to talk to a financial advisor. I've used this example before. The 4% rule says, if you have $1 million, you can take out 4% of that a year, which is $40,000, and have a fairly high likelihood of not running out of money during your lifetime. There's no guarantees. All kinds of weird things can happen. That's a useful rule of thumb to see if you're getting close. But with something that important, I'd encourage you to see a fee-only financial advisor. You can find one by just Googling fee-only financial advisor. Another useful rule of thumb, and now I'm letting you inside the financial planning tent, so you got to keep this between us. But sometimes people will say, well, if I got a 6% return, how many years would that take to double? And financial advisors seem to always know what those answers are at the tip of their tongue. And it's because we're using something called the rule of 72. So basically, if somebody says, I want to double my money in 6 years, what kind of return do I need? Well, I know you need 12%. And people are thinking, well, how does he do that without a calculator? It's just a rule of 72. So if you said, I'm going to get a 10% return, how long does that take to double? Well, it's 7.2 years. So don't tell anyone I told you that secret, but it's useful for financial advisors, and I think you'll find it useful as well. Here's a super useful rule of thumb. When you get a raise, particularly if you're starting off when you're young and you don't have responsibilities yet, when you get a raise, half of it goes to you and half of it goes to your retirement plan. If you do that throughout your lifetime, you're going to have a really solid foundation for saving. And I think I know it's hard to do, particularly as you get older and you have a mortgage and you're saving up for your kids' college expenses and you just have life expenses. It's hard to do, but to the extent you can do that, when you get a raise, half goes to you and half goes to future you. Let's put it that way. Okay, another useful rule of thumb houses are getting more and more expensive, and a common question is, how much can I spend on my house? Now, I've got another video that I've made on this. My feelings on this are a little bit unorthodox, but the general rule of thumb there is the max that you want to spend is 30% of your gross salary. And that you have to include in that not just your mortgage, but your insurance payments and your taxes. I think that's a good rule of thumb. Now, it wasn't that long ago, when I started in the industry, that rule of thumb was closer to 25. So that's extended. And I think 25 is better than 30, but with what's been happening in houses, I know that that's hard to do. And one of the reasons I like this rule of thumb is, if you think about it, for most of us, our biggest expenses are our mortgage, and for a lot of people, not for me because I drive used cars, but for a lot of other people, a lot of Americans, their second largest expense is their car. In fact, believe it or not, for Americans, the average expense for a car is 15% of their pay, their salary. So if you're paying 30% of your gross for your home and 15% on your car, you're almost up to half of your income, and then Uncle Sam's going to take a fourth of it. So that doesn't leave a whole lot of money for other things. So for me personally, I think buying a used car is the least sacrificial way for me to cut expenses. But we're all different. You do you. If you really love cars, that's great. Use that, and then you just think, where else can I cut back? Be sure to stick around to the end, because I'm going to circle back to the dangerous rules of thumb. And I'm going to share with you what I consider to be the most dangerous. But the last good rule of thumb is the best investment you can ever make is an investment in yourself. And I think that's so true. Not only just from a financial reward standpoint, but also just from a happiness factor, right? We only get one crack at this life. And so doing something that we love doing, I think is super important. And if that means you need to go back to school, or you need to go to a coding boot camp, or you've always wanted to be an artist and it means you're going to move to Sedona, Arizona for a while and practice your art skills, an investment in yourself. We don't get any redos in life, right? So I think an investment in yourself is the best investment you'll ever make. And I think it makes a lot of sense. If there's something you want out of life that you don't have the skills for, go back and get those skills and live the life that you want to live. Okay, now let's go back to the most dangerous rule of thumb that I really do wish there was a way to go back in history and erase it. We're all wired to kind of think that risk is volatility, right? Risk in the stock market is, I watch the news and the market's up 2%, the market's down 5%, the market's down 20% for the year. We're all wired to think that that's what risk is. But actually, I think what risk is what is the likelihood of you not achieving your most important financial goals? That's really the risk. So if you look at a bank account that's not beating inflation, a bank account could be the risky investment you have if you need your investments to beat inflation over time to grow in value so you can reach your goals. And even though there's going to be no volatility, if you have that money like in a CD, there's not going to be any volatility. You put $100,000 in a CD and they agree to pay you 5% interest at the end of the year. Each of those monthly statements from the bank is going to say, you have $100,000, and at the end of the year, we're going to give you back not only your $100,000, but the $5,000 in interest. A lot of people would say that's a low risk investment. I would say that could be one of your riskiest investments, because if you need that money to grow to achieve your goals, you're not going to do that in a CD. So I wish we could rewire society and say, daily volatility, monthly volatility doesn't matter as much as how likely are you to reach your goals. The bank CD might have a likelihood of 0%. The stock market might have an 80% or a 90% likelihood of helping you achieving your goal over an investment cycle, which tends to be 7 to 10 years. So I hope that makes sense. I hope it was worth sticking around to the end. If I could rewrite the history books in my industry, that's how I would define risk. And I hope you found this helpful. If you did, do me a favor, hit the like button. Really does help other people find this channel. Also, leave me a comment. I do try to read all the comments. I typically can reply to at least a couple dozen every day. Hopefully I've replied to yours. If not, hopefully sometime soon I'll be replying to yours. I also get future video ideas from the comments. So if there's something you'd like me to talk about, I won't talk about specific situations, right? I don't know your specific situation. I can't give you financial advice. No YouTuber can. But I can give you education where things are on your radar screen. You can do your own research. And maybe if you want, connect with a fee-only financial advisor near you. Just simply Google them. So thumbs for likes, subs for love if you love this channel, comments as a way to say thanks to Azul. So until next time, I am Azul, encouraging you to take full advantage of the youth of your senior years. Remember, you're only young once. Use this time wisely.